and take your liberty and be a blessing to us.
Thank you, Frank. There we go. Am I on? I did. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. You guys can hear me, correct? Fantastic. Can you say shalom? Oh, you could do better than that. Come on. Shalom. All right. Shalom. Frank, I want you to know that I lived in Manhattan for 10 years. And you know what? One of my favorite places to hand out gospel tracts? Yankee Stadium. Because a lot of Jewish people are baseball fans. You know why? Because it's the first verse of the Bible. Did you know that? Yeah. In the big inning. Ah, that's some Jewish humor. In the big inning. But I love going up there, and I actually wrote a track called Remember the Babe. And it connected Babe Ruth to the babe that would be born to the Virgin. And the track talked about the curse of the Bambino and the strife between the evil empire and the Red Sox. And I handed out thousands and thousands of those gospel tracks. And one day, you know, because I'm a big baseball fan, and I'm handing out tracks, and this gentleman came up to me and he said, it was a playoff game against the Baltimore Orioles. And the gentleman came up to me and he said, I'm Catholic. And my wife won 2 tickets at her work today for the game, and I don't have anybody to take me. So he said, I don't want to scalp it because I'm afraid of getting arrested. He said, I'll give you the ticket if you promise to go into the game. So I was able to attend a playoff game at Yankee Stadium for free. All right. And so because of that, and Frank, I love handing out tracts. You want to be outreach. So you know what? I'm going to give you this as a gift. So Frank's going to wear this around Wellfleet. Isaiah 53, this chapter will change your life. And hopefully many people will come up and ask you about Isaiah 53 too, okay? All righty. Can you start the slide as a full slide presentation? You click up where it says slideshow. Up on the top, it'll say slideshow, and you can just click stuff from the beginning. But the message this morning, how appropriate. I've been, for the most part, speaking this message a lot. Hey, we'll wait for a second. Oh, right there. Yep. Click on it. Actually, if you go to the far left, you can click on one of the icons. Well, if we can't get it, we'll just, Well, let me share with you that the message this morning, I think, is apropos. Is there hope for peace in the Middle East? I mean, that obviously is something that we would hopefully pray about, imagine, but the reality is it's not necessarily something new. It's newer for us. And these are kind of just through our lifetime, the players that have been part of this conflict. And it is a conflict. And what I wanted to do this morning, because I believe that there's a lot of misinformation out there, I wanted to give you kind of, it's not really a sermon, it's more of a Bible study. That's theological, it's biblical, it's cultural, it's historical. I want you to have a pretty good idea of what's going on. Two, I want to thank you because I think, and I travel a lot. Is it pretty scary to put up an Israeli flag today? It is. And I want to thank you in the church because you're standing with not just the Jewish people in Israel, you're standing with God, and it's important. And does it take courage? Yeah, it takes courage a lot to stand up for the truth sometimes in a world that doesn't want that to happen. So, in our immediate time, next slide. Next slide. Oh, are you having a hard time doing this projector in slide presentation? If you want to go back to the other, then just to make it easy, because this morning the visuals are going to be important because you have to visualize kind of what has happened. And obviously, we understand that on October 7th, 2023, things changed in Israel, things changed in the world. Okay? Hamas came over. Hamas is the group that the Palestinians who live in Gaza are elected to run their part of Israel. And they're a terrorist organization. There's nothing else to go around that. They are, but they were elected, and their mindset was always to have conflict with Israel. It's just part of not only their mindset, their covenant to really remove Israel from where it is. And there's always been conflict. October 7th changed things, though, because that conflict, Israel, over the years, just so that you know, Hamas is not able to import anything militarily. I have a couple with me this morning who have been longtime friends and donors, and they live nearby. But Lee, you've been in the military. I haven't. But in this case, Hamas was never able to buy rockets, but they made them. So you can just imagine that they don't travel that far, but they were able to launch them in Israel for the last 20 years. And places like Sderot and some in that part of the Negev, constantly seeing rockets come in on a daily basis. So Israel came up with a defense system called the Iron Dome that would stop rockets. And these are really homemade. So they're not very, very forceful, but they are a nuisance. So they created the Iron Dome. And it's been pretty, pretty good. I don't think Israel ever thought Hamas would attack them, though. And they kind of let their guard down. And on October 7th, 2023, Hamas came and killed 1,200 Israelis that were living in that kind of part of Israel. And it changed things. But the reality is that that wasn't the beginning of the conflict. Okay? And next slide. This conflict has been going on in Israel, here in the United States, but you're probably not aware of it. I mean, you are maybe locally, but I've been on college campuses a lot, and there's a movement among young college people called BDS. And it's been going on for about 15 to 20 years. It's an acronym for boycott, divest, and sanction. There's groups called the Students for the Justice of Palestine on college campuses, and they want the universities that they go to school in to boycott anything made in Israel. They want all colleges to sell their stocks connected to Israel. I have no idea how that would ever happen if you had mutual funds. And they want to sanction all products and an opportunity to work with Israel. And this has been a movement that's been going on, and it, after October 7th, really came forward. Okay. And this group on campus, next slide, started to really do some things. And locally, and this is kind of my domain, you know, on April 19th, students at Boston University protested in solidarity with the Columbia students, that, in a sense, they didn't want Jewish students to attend classes at Columbia University. Harvard students set up an encampment at Harvard University to prevent, again, Jewish students from going into classes. MIT, UMass Amherst. And you know what's interesting about the strife and the rise of anti-Semitism lately in this country? A lot of it has happened in very Jewish places. If you told me that a Jewish student might feel unsafe at Georgia, all right, I get it. But Harvard, Columbia, Boston University, MIT, these are very strong Jewish institutions in Jewish areas. So it's ramped up the fact that for the first time, really, since the Holocaust, Jewish people do not feel safe in the United States. You wear your cross. You know how many Jewish students and people that I have talked to over the last years since October 7th, they won't wear a Star of David visibly. A lot of Jewish men in New York who would wear a yarmulke or a kippah, they might wear a baseball hat because they're afraid. And Jewish people never thought that that would happen here. Who would have thought that putting out an Israeli flag would be the most vile thing that you could do in a community? But it's here, and we have to realize it. Next slide. And I love going to college campuses because I just have been a missionary my whole life. So if I can put on a T-shirt that says Jews for Jesus and go down into the New York City subway system, Frank, if I can go to Yankee Stadium in the Bronx, I can go to BU and Harvard. Doesn't bother me, and I love it. And the top left, that's my son Josh. On his 13th birthday, he came to BU with me. And he is starting to feel that maybe God might call him into missions. And we visit college campuses, Harvard, UMass, MIT. So when you support our ministry, you're going with me, and I need your help. Because you know who's sticking up for Jewish students on these college campuses? Well, we know the presidents aren't. Do you know that no Christian group will stand up for Jewish students on these campuses? I've contacted Campus Crusade, InterVarsity, all of the major student groups on these campuses twice, and nobody has gotten back to me. They won't even respond to my email. I had one at UMass who in the springtime said, Mitch, I'm really busy, but I'll be able to talk to you in November. All I wanted to do was talk to them to let these Christian groups know. Do you know that churches and Christians and student groups on campus, you have an opportunity that we haven't ever seen before, and you probably don't even realize it. Really, for the last 2,000 years, you know who Jewish people have kind of blamed for a lot of the anti-Semitism and hatred against them? I hate to say it, I'm not going to go into it this morning, but a lot of that has come from Christians in the church. You rejected Jesus, God rejected you. The church has replaced Israel. So now you're not the apple of God's eye. All of that, if you grow up Jewish, we see Christians as a lot of times as a group that really don't like Jewish people. But they're not blaming the church for this bout of anti-Semitism. So, Frank, that's why I'm very happy that I'm here this morning, because you don't realize, and you do realize it, because you have seen positive assurance from Jewish people in the area that says, thank you for putting up that flag. So you have a tremendous opportunity to talk to Jewish people. They need you to let them know that you're standing with them, because nobody is standing up for Israel and the Jewish people, especially here in America. So thank you. Thank you. Okay? And I love when I go to campuses, because I wear a shirt. I'll wear my Isaiah 53 shirt. I have another shirt that I wear called Oppose Anti-Semitism, Stop the Hate. I have another shirt, and I brought some shirts with me this morning if you like wearing T-shirts. Never again, never alone. Because I want Jewish people to know they're never alone. God is with them, even though they might not feel it. And when I wear those T-shirts, they don't know who I am, and they'll come up to the table and go, so what group are you with? And I say, well, for full disclosure, my name is Mitch. I'm a Messianic Jew, and I'm here to stand up for you and Israel, because nobody else is doing it. And we have conversations. And what's interesting is they might not theologically agree with me about who Jesus is. But for the first time, they might have a discussion, and they appreciate the fact that I'm there. And I love that. It's given not only Christians and churches, but Messianic Jews a standing within the Jewish world that we never had before. So that's why I love going to these campuses. And I continue to go. In fact, I was in BU 2 weeks ago, in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I had some amazing talks. But it's amazing that I don't know if it's going to continue to happen. But I was there, about a week after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And it was interesting because obviously people knew that he was a conservative. I don't think people in this country realized his testimony. And that really got broadcasted. But another thing that I realized on college campuses is he was known for somebody that would go onto the college campuses so that he could at least have a dialogue. And you know what I noticed? A couple of people that probably wouldn't talk to me a couple of weeks ago actually stopped and talked. In fact, one of them was a Muslim. And he says, you and I diametrically disagree on almost everything, but let's have a discussion. You know, he might have just walked away before that. We had a discussion. And when he left, Chosen People produces a book called Isaiah 53 Explained, and we do it in many different languages. So I gave him an Isaiah 53 in the Farsi language, which he spoke, and he said that he would read it. So amazing how out of conflict can come great opportunities to share the good news, and I want you to know that. Okay, next slide. But I'm here to talk to you about this conflict because it's not new. Next slide. Oh. Okay, and then the next slide. So this is kind of, today it's Israel and Palestine, but it goes way, way, way back. And you know where this stems from? Genesis 12, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, roughly about 1800 to 2000 BC. And let me read the words of it, because this is known as the Abraham covenant that God made with Abram. And listen to this. Now the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's home to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I'll bless those who bless you. And the one who curses you, I will curse. In you. The Hebrew word for in you is zerah. Abram, in your seed will come one who will bless the entire world. So God gave Abraham three major promises. There's more in there, but the three major ones, next slide, is that I will bless you with the place. That's called Israel. I'll bless you with the people. Long time ago, they were called Israelites. So the place and the people were the same. Today, it's the Jews. And I will bless you with a promise. God created all of this for one reason, for you. For his promise of the Messiah to come, do you realize that God needed to create a people in a place? Because if you want to be the Messiah, you know the first thing that you have to prove? You're Jewish. And so, do you know how the New Testament starts off? The genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. First thing Jesus had to do is actually, in a sense, prove that not only was he Jewish, you have to be born from the right tribe, the tribe of Judah. So not anybody can just be the Messiah. You have to be Jewish and born from a proper tribe, and then you have to be born in a certain place, Bethlehem, which is in Israel. So God needed to create a place and a people to make sure that the promised Messiah would come, and more specifically at the right time as well. But isn't that amazing? That's what he did 2,000 years ago. Okay? But we have, and next slide. And it was a promise that God told to Abraham, passed down from you to your descendants, right? On the day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I've given the land from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. You want to see the original land grant that God promised to the Jewish people? Next slide. It almost looks like the state of Nebraska. It's huge. From the river, the Mediterranean Sea, all the way to the Euphrates. That's the original land grant. Now, for the most part, the Jewish people have just taken the west coast of that. But the reality is, Abram lived in Ur, right on the other side of the most southeast corner of that royal grant. And God told him to go to the land of Canaan, because he says, I'm giving it to you and your descendants. And like I said, there's some disagreements on the time. I picked 1850 BC to just put it into perspective. Okay, next slide. And it was going to be a promise from Abraham to Isaac and Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and every Jewish person is a descendant of one of those 12 sons. Okay, next slide. And under Joshua, finally, in 1400 BC, the Jewish people, after they came out of Egypt, took the land and divided it up into 12 different territories named after each one of the descendants of Israel. All righty. But we have a problem, and this is where it comes in. Next slide. Because who's the firstborn of Abram? Ishmael. Ishmael. It's actually a Hebrew name. Did you know that? Ishmael, the Lord knows. And he talks to Ishmael, and he writes this in Genesis 17. I have heard you. I will bless him. I'll make him fruitful. He will greatly increase in numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I'll make them into a great nation. We almost have kind of a parallel universe going on here. You think 12 sons of Ishmael and 12 sons of Jacob is a coincidence? I don't think so. Got a parallel universe in a sense, because the reality is God has a plan, and the evil one is always trying to prevent it from happening. But let's look at the promises that God gave to Ishmael, because he did. Next slide. I'll bless you. He has. I mean, there's a lot of people that know about Ishmael and fruitful. You know how many Jewish people there are in the world? 15 million. You know how many Arabs there are in the world? Over 1 billion. So he blessed them. He made them fruitful. The Arab country. I'll make you kings. He developed a nation, a religious nation, through this group of people called Islam. So in a sense, he did bless Ishmael, but you notice one thing missing. Well, two. No promise of a Messiah coming through the Arab people, okay, and no land. God gave the land to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and unfortunately, when you really come down to it, the conflict comes down to one thing: the land. Who owns the land? Because in that culture, when a father died, who would get the land? The firstborn. Who's the firstborn? Ishmael. But God didn't give it to Ishmael. God gave it to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is really where the conflict really begins. Okay? Now, traditionally, if we stay here for a second, Ishmael, when he was kind of a teenager, got kicked out of Canaan. It wasn't called Israel yet. Got kicked out of Canaan. And you know where Ishmael and his mother Hagar lived? In the land called Paran, which later we believe came Arab in modern-day Saudi Arabia. And they lived there and were very fruitful, but they did not live in the land. There's always been descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the land since 1850. Okay? Now, what's fascinating is in our modern conflict, the conflict is between Israel, the Jews, and the Palestinians. Now, there's probably about 5-6 million Palestinians in the world. So they're a very small group within the Arab world. So almost all Palestinians are Arabs, but most Arabs are not Palestinians. So how did they get the name? Because I don't know if most people understand this, which is fascinating, because now we get into the history that is in the Bible, but it's very, very interesting. Next slide. So Israel obviously had enemies during the time of King David as we move up about 1,000 years. The Philistines. Anybody know the most famous Philistine in the Bible? Goliath. That's right, the man from Golgotha. Okay? But here's what's interesting. Did you know that he's a Philistine, but do you know how they got their name, the Philistines? Because do you know that Goliath is actually Greek? It's fascinating. About 700 years after Abraham lives there, Ramses II and III notice a group of people from the Aegean Sea, from the Greek world, migrating to, you know where? Gaza. And they gave them a special name. They called them the Paliset people in Egyptian. And Paliset got translated into the Philistines. They were the sea people. So technically, if you say you're a Palestinian, you got the name from being a derivative of the Philistines. You're actually Greek. But that is not true today. But technically, that's where the name comes from. Isn't that amazing? The Philistines were Greek. And why did they leave the Greek islands to come to Gaza? I don't know why, but they did, and they became enemies of the Jewish people. Okay, next slide. And what happened was in 125 AD, the Jews had a final revolt against the Romans. And anybody here been to Israel? I'm the only one. Anybody ever hear of Masada? Masada was a fortress built by King Hedred. It was kind of the last stance of the Jewish people, and they got wiped out. And in 125 AD, Rome decides all the Jews were going to kick you out of Israel, or at that time called Judea. And the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, so there's no more priesthood. And then in 125 AD, Rome basically just tells all the Jews, you're out. And he kicks them out, and they rename the land. It was originally called Canaan. When Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob came, and then Joshua, they renamed the land Israel. Then later on, because of just the political stances in Israel, they renamed the land Judea. But in 125, the Romans said, there's no more Jews here, so guess what we're going to do? We're going to rename the land to the land of your enemies. And they renamed the land Palestinia in Latin, which is the name of the Philistines. So the word Palestine was invented really by the Latins. They renamed the land because they just wanted to show the Jews, this is how much power and control we have. We're done with you. No more temple, no more people, you're out. Now, there's always been a few people living who were Jews in that part of the land. Almost no Arabs, because Arabs didn't live in Israel during that time. Jews did, and the Romans. Okay? So how did the Arabs come to eventually come to Israel? Well, again, history, next slide, will share with us that there was a man who was a descendant of Ishmael in 570 AD. So in a sense, Ishmael was born in 1800. We'll just round this off, make it 600 AD. So roughly about 2,400 years after Ishmael lived in the land, descendants all lived in Arabia, and then there was a descendant called Muhammad. And Muhammad came up with an idea. Let's start a new religion. And it's based in Saudi Arabia because that's where all the Arabs lived. And in a sense, that's the birth of Islam. And then Islam spreads. Okay? But they have a goal. And it's not just to dominate the world, but really they want to dominate it not only physically, but spiritually. Next slide. Because again, as we notice, the conflict goes all the way back to Genesis. Look at how the Quran now reinvents the look at Genesis 12, 1 through and 3. And it's written here in one of the commentaries on that passage, a promise is made to Abraham that he would be blessed and that all the nations would bless him and be blessed in him. It is only the descendants of Ishmael through Muhammad and the Muslims who have fulfilled the promise. So they now reinvent the promises of Genesis 12, 1, 2, and 3, not to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and not to the Jews, and not to Jesus the Messiah. It is now positioned where that is going to be fulfilled through the descendants of Abraham, Ishmael, and Muhammad, and their religion is Islam, not Judaism, and then Christianity. And that's a huge, huge shift. So they now want to come back and take Israel because they believe now it's theirs, and they start to migrate there. So really, the Muslims do eventually get there. And ultimately, next slide, modern day, they really expanded it when the Ottoman Empire kind of eventually took control of that whole place, really from 1259 AD to 1920. Now, what's amazing is the land is never fully given permission to be its own country. So there's never officially ever been a country called Palestine. there's a place in the world that is Israel that was renamed by the Romans called Palestine. And after the Jews were kicked out, the world called it Palestine. But you know what's amazing? You know who basically used the word Palestine to look at that part of the world? Jews and Christians. Arabs didn't like the word Palestine, actually. So my grandfather used to get a newspaper called the Palestinian News. It was a Jewish newspaper from Palestine, okay? Because that's how the world knew it, but it was never its own country. It was just a territory of the Ottoman Empire. In a sense, Palestine isn't its own country today. The reality is the West Bank and Gaza is part of Israel, okay? And next slide. And in a sense, the Ottoman Empire had a war in 1914 with the Brits and the French. But look at their empire. It's huge. Almost like the old Roman Empire and the Greek Empire in that part of the world. And anybody know what happened to the Ottoman Empire in World War I? Did they win or did they lose? They lost. And when you lose a war, what generally happens? You lose land, and that's just the reality of war. Lee, like I said, I've never served, but there's been a lot of wars in the history of the world, and most of the time it's fought over land. Okay, and you know the people who win wars usually write the history. Okay, and World War One, everybody knows about it, and you guess what? The Brits and the French decided to do with the Ottoman Empire. Divide it up. Okay, next slide. Okay. So in a sense, there's a place called Palestine where roughly maybe a couple of 100,000 people are living. Really, there wasn't a lot. It wasn't its own country. Probably at this point, I would say 75% people who lived in Palestine were Arabs and about 25% were Jewish. Okay. And next slide. And in a sense, Islam really expanded. And that's kind of the world that we live in today, you know, with roughly around 1.8 billion Arabs. A lot of them are Muslim, and Islam is spread out. And right in the middle of the green, the dark green, is Israel. I think God has them right where he wants them. It's amazing that all the countries right around Israel are Arabs and Muslims. Okay, next slide. Next slide. So let's just look modern day because we use a term called Zionism. And what is Zionism? People think it's a bad word, but Theodor Herschel basically saw that Jewish people, wherever we went, we were persecuted. And we have been. And it's amazing because you know how God kept the Jewish people for 2,000 years Jewish? I hate to say it, but persecution. Everywhere we went, we try to just live our lives as Jews, make things better, and people, for some reason, they don't like that. And then anti-Semitism comes in, and the more persecution you get as Jews, we tend to kind of keep together. But I think it was the way that God kept us Jewish. And it has happened for 2,000 years. Jewish people, and unfortunately, a lot of it was from the church. Jewish people called Christ killers. You killed our God. Very normal for the average Jewish person to hear that growing up. You know? I mean, your mom grew up Jewish. She didn't marry a Jewish person, correct? And that's kind of, in a sense, back then, Frank, that was not the norm, was it? So I bet you that she, because she married somebody who was not Jewish, You know what they probably internally said in your family? She was a traitor. And that just happens to go because when you marry somebody who's, say, Christian or Catholic and you're Jewish, it causes a lot of tension because of that strife. So Theodor Herzl said the only way the Jewish people are going to stop being persecuted will be to go back to their ancestral homeland, which is Israel. And Zionism started to be created as a thought. And the Jewish people, next slide, go to England in 1917 when World War I was over and advocated that they have their land back. And Balfour, Sir Arthur James Balfour, the Foreign Secretary, granted the Jewish people the permission. And let me read this to you because they had control of Palestine. His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. So I need you to understand this. It's going to be a national home for Jewish people to be Jewish and exercise their religion. And will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jews. Now, here's where the modern conflict comes in with the land. We saw it with Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac. Modern day, here's what happens. The British control Palestine and give Palestine now to the Jews. But only 25% of the people living in Palestine are Jewish and the 75% are Arab. And the British mandated that if Israel becomes a national home for the Jewish people, they can't kick out the Arabs and they have to at least let them live there. Okay, but that's hard because if you are dominating a country and another country that is actually overseeing you allows somebody else to come in, do you feel threatened? Well, I think they did, and it caused a lot of tension, okay? But the British government understood biblically that the Jewish people needed a land after World War II so that a Holocaust would not happen again, and the best thing to do would be to give them back where they have always, considered their homeland, okay? Next slide. So the yellow and the green was the original land grant issued by the British. Pretty big. It's almost all of Jordan into Iraq and most of modern day Israel. But as they start carving things up, people are fighting over the land. And then the British got tired of dealing with this, so they gave it over to the League of Nations and then eventually the United Nations. But next slide. Because this, I think, gets overlooked too. The British cut up the whole Middle East. There was no country called Iran. It's been called Persia over the years. But do you know that the modern day country of Iran was established because the Shah of Iran had made deals and said, okay, we'll create the new country called Iran, and you can see where the boundaries are. Same thing with Jordan. Next slide. They carved up the Middle East based on who kind of controlled the people in certain areas. It was all very political. Nobody argues whether they have a right to the land, do they? So guess what? Israel does the same thing. You're giving land all to these other people groups. We want our land too. So they were just doing what everybody else was doing. And you saw the original land grant, but eventually, here's what was voted on. And next slide. So the UN came up with a kind of a deal. Since the Arabs live in the purple areas and the Jews predominantly live in the orange area, we're going to come up with a two-state solution. That Israel can have the orange and the Palestinians can have the purple. And they were going to vote on it. And next slide. And on May 14, 1948, there was two votes. Well, there's supposed to be two votes. One for a national home for the Jewish people, and then the other would be a national home for the Arabs who live in Palestine. The world voted to give Israel the orange section. The Arabs said, we don't want to share the land with the Jews. So we're not going to have a vote for a two-state solution because we don't want a two-state solution. We want a one-state solution where we control everything. Well, now Israel is a new country because the world has said you get to go back on May 14, 1948. Next slide. And the next day, Israel was attacked by all of the Arab neighbors. The next day, and they didn't have, they had some ragtag armies, Lee, but I don't think that they, it's just because God called them back. I know that God said, you're staying. And the reality is that war, the Arabs had way more people and sophistication than the Israeli army, but in 9 months, they couldn't defeat the Israeli army, and they have a kind of a truce. And they decided Israel would continue to have the orange, Jordan would control the West Bank, and Egypt would control the people in Gaza. And that lasted for a while, up until, next slide, to the war of, can you go down just a little? Oh, yeah, you can see it. The 6-Day War in 1967, and this actually changed really the landscape of the land of what we know today. Because Israel notices 20 years after the truce, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt are aligning tanks on the borders. So what do you think Israel is thinking is going to happen? They're going to be attacked. So they strike first, and in 6 days, they expand the territory. They take the West Bank, they take the Golan Heights, they take the whole Sinai Peninsula, and they take the Gaza Strip in 6 days. They now have a very, very strong army. And they take all that land because they weren't going to wait to get attacked. And that caused problems. Why? Because now the West Bank and Gaza, which is predominantly Arabs who call themselves Palestinians, they don't want to be part of Israel. But to cause some of the conflicts, Israel has taken that land through a war, and now it's part of Israel. But everybody who lives there are not Jewish. And you can see the tension. So, as a Jew and as a believer in Jesus, I believe the land is what God gave to the Jews. But I'm pragmatic. There are a lot of people who are living in the land that don't like that. And that's why there's this tension. Okay? And in 1967, next slide, you're going to hear this come up a lot probably in the next few weeks. If they're going to work on some type of two-state solution, they want to go back to the borders of 1967. The problem is Israel doesn't look the same as it did in 1967. And now there's 900,000 Jews living in the West Bank in settlements. So it's just not that easy. So again, Israel is a little bit at peace because they've taken those territories. Next slide. There's another war started on Yom Kippur. And again, they tried to, in a sense, take over Israel, but they couldn't. and there's always been things going on. Go down because we're going to finish up here. Go down to where it says current issues. So in a sense, there are current issues. Okay? Can you have a two-state solution? I don't see how that's possible. Because you got Israel in the middle with another country that really doesn't like Israel. And Israel is sandwiched by people who don't like them. Okay? And Israel is afraid that if they grant statehood to the Palestinians, the first thing they're going to do is buy weapons and attack them. So it's not that easy just to say a two-state solution. These settlements, there's 900,000 Jewish people living in lands that, in a sense, we would call Palestinian. Okay? It was done strategically. Why? Because you can't now go back to the borders of 1967. Jerusalem. Who wants Jerusalem to be their capital? Both. But in a sense, right now it's the capital of Israel. But if there's a two-state solution, Palestinians want Jerusalem to be their capital. Okay? There's security checkpoints, refugees. This is a big one because in the original war in 1948, about 500,000 Arabs left Israel as they were instructed by the other Arab countries during the strife, and they lived in Jordan. While the 500,000 Palestinians now are 2 to 3 million, and they're really not Jordanian citizens, they're refugees. And they're living in no man's land, okay? And then the question is, two states? How about one state? Should there be one state where it's not the national home for the Jewish people and it'll just be a democracy? What would eventually happen? Be more Arabs and Jews, and then they would right. So that's not a solution. And I don't think biblically it's going to happen because God is going to use Israel in the end times. So Israel needs to be, in a sense, the focus. Like you said, you know what Ezekiel 38 says about Israel and Jerusalem? You called it the center of the world. The Bible says it's the navel. It's where everything happens. But interesting thing that's happened, and this is how I want to end, is there hope? Well, next slide. Oh, you know what? Oh, next slide after this one. You're going to hear this come up a lot called the Abrahamic Accords. Could it very well be that there'll be some type of peace because behind the scenes, our country has tried to get Israel to have normal relationships with other Arab countries, not so much with the Palestinians, Hamas. They've tried to organize it where they'll have relations with the other Arab nations. And I think that that's going to have a play into what we're going to see. If you notice, we as America did not try to get Israel and Hamas to sit down at a table. We sat down with the Arab countries, and now they're putting pressure on. We'll see if that works. Because I mean, I have a lot of friends. We have like 30 or 40 workers over in Israel. Israel is really open to the gospel now, you know? And what's amazing is with the 1040 window, do you know how many Arabs have heard the gospel over the last 30 years? A lot. A lot of Palestinians have heard the gospel because it's been being penetrated. So we ultimately know that, you know, if everybody in Israel and Palestine believed in Jesus, the world would be much different, wouldn't it? So is there hope for peace in the Middle East? Last slide. Well, we're in a historic time that we're going to see how it plays out. Pray, because the scripture says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And that's how I want to end. I want peace. I think the average Palestinian just wants to work and raise a family and do what we want to all do. They're not in a culture that will allow them to do that. So I hope, one, that a lot of Jewish people in Israel and Palestinians become believers in Jesus. That would change everything. Two, I pray that there would be peace because it's a lot better than having conflict. Ultimately, though, we know about the end times, and it's going to be a very, very horrific time in the history of the world. But for right now, I'd like to end one, thanking you for allowing me to come. I took a few more minutes, but I've tried to cut this down, Frank, and I can't because it's just methodically going through history and the culture to see where we are today. Let me pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and then I'll give it back to Frank. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father and King. It's such a complicated, detailed history. It goes all the way back to Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac, and currently it's through their descendants. Technically, Jews and Arabs they're half brothers. We have the same father, Abraham, but we've never seen to have coexisted. There's always strife. Lord, I do believe that the hand of the evil one is behind this too. You created the truth. You created Israel, the Jewish people, with the thought of your son, the Messiah, coming to save the world. There's a counter narrative through Islam. It's through that people, through good works, and through territory that's not theirs is their plan, and it doesn't work. Good works, being good people, that's not what the gospel is. So, Lord, we pray for the gospel to be shined through all of this, because it's really the only hope for peace that anybody can have. You can have physical peace, but ultimately that's going to wane and it will just lead to the next conflict. But believing in Jesus, that conflict lead for conversations that Frank have with the Jewish people down here. I asked, Lord, that it would open up conversations that Frank and those here in the church would speak to those who are Arab and Muslim, Lord, that they would be able to hear the truth and the gospel, because that's ultimately what we want to do, Lord. So, Father, thank you for the scriptures that clearly give us an idea of your plan of creating Israel so that there would be Jewish people to give birth to the Messiah. And it says, in his name we pray, amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. Wow. Praise the Lord. I know there's a lot, probably some of you, because I know my people, that you weren't tracking with, and I have a lot of questions too. As a Christian that lives in Wellfleet, some of you have difficulties keeping your family together, paying the bills, and being happy. Uh, why do I be concerned about Israel? That's a great question. That's a beautiful question. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I quit high school. When I went to college, I had to make up my grades and everything to qualify to go to college. And with God's help, I did. So I'm just a person. Happened to be that my mother was Jewish, but that never meant anything to me whatsoever. Still loved my mother. If she was Irish or Jamaican, it didn't matter. She was my mother. So that had nothing to do with it until I became a Christian. Changed everything. Changed everything. And then to discover that Jesus was a Jew. And I wanted to know everything about Jesus. I want to know if he knew anything about baseball or football or what sport he played, what kind of clothes he wore. Did he have any friends that he hung around with? Did he ever like a girl? I wanted to know everything about Jesus. And I had a lot of questions. But the more questions we have about Jesus, the more Jewish things come brought up, because he was a Jew. He celebrated all of the feasts, and so I learned something about the feasts, and I don't know them, really good, and I don't celebrate the feasts except for Passover, but it was about Jesus. And then I started reading the Bible, and it was written by Jewish people right from Genesis. Moses was used to write Genesis, so you can't get away from it. Old Testament, Jews were used by God to write, inspire the scriptures. God inspired them, used Jewish people. New Testament too, Jewish. And then I look, what did the Jewish people ever do for the world? And I discovered, I don't know if I can think of anything they didn't do to help the world. And so they're in it all the time. So just being a simple guy that struggled to get his feet on the ground and so forth, I found that Jewishness has a lot to do with who we are. Then I discover that America is a Judeo-Christian country. And that our church, because we're Bible believers, we're Judeo-Christian people. And then I discover as I go along that God gives a promise, and I want to know God's promises. When I'm laying on the table with cancer, or my daughter's having all kinds of trouble, and my son's having trouble, and my wife's dealing with this, that, and the other thing, I want to know the promises of God that I can pray for them. And we struggle financially, so I want to ask God for help there. And I can't get away from mingling with Jewish people. I just can't do it. God is still good to me when I didn't know anything about it. But as I started to get knowing about it, I want to know more about God, Jewish people. And then God, I discover, says, I'll bless those people who bless Jewish people. So now I want to know all about my grandmother. And I want to know about her life and what kind of a Jew she was and her grandmother. Now I get interested. It's like when you want to do your bedroom over, you're going to remodel it, and all you want to do is paint it. Well, it doesn't stay with just painting it. Next thing, you're going to change the curtains, then you're going to change the rug, then you better paint the ceiling too because you haven't done anything in it. It's like one thing leads to another, and here I am. So we have some questions, Mitch. We have a lot of questions.